Hi everyone. I understand that studying can be really stressful sometimes. So here we are today, sitting in our beloved Hogwarts Common Room, trying to enjoy a stress free study night. Today, I am going to be reading to you Chapter 1 of the Class 6 NCERT textbook, Our Past 1. So here we go. Chapter 1. What, where, how, and when. Finding out what happened. If you want to find out what happened yesterday, you could listen to the radio, watch television, read a newspaper, etc. If you want to know what happened last year, you could ask somebody who remembers. But what about long ago? Let us see how it can be done. What can we know about the past? There are several things we can find out. What people ate, the kind of clothes they wore, the houses in which they lived. We can find out about the lives of hunters, herders, farmers, rulers, merchants, priests, craftspersons, artists, musicians, and scientists. We can also find out about the games children played, the stories they heard, the plays they saw, the songs they sang. Look at the river Narmada on the map. People have lived along the banks of this river for several 100,000 years. Some of the earliest people who lived here were skilled gatherers, that is, people who gathered their food. They knew about the vast wealth of plants in the surrounding forest and collected roots, fruits, and other forest produce for their food. They also hunted animals. Now let's look at Suleiman and Kirtar hills in the northwest. Some of the areas where women and men first began to grow crops such as wheat and barley about 8,000 years ago are located here. People also began rearing animals like sheep, goat, and cattle and lived in villages. Let's look at Garo Hills to the northeast and the Vindhyas in the central India. These were some of the areas where agriculture developed. The places where rice was first grown are the north of the Vindhyas. Trace the river Indus and its tributaries. Tributaries are smaller rivers that flow into a larger river. About 4,700 years ago, some of the earliest cities flourished on the banks of these rivers. Later, about 2,500 years ago, cities developed on the bank of the Ganga and its tributaries and along the seacoast. Locate the Ganga and its tributary called the Son. In ancient times, the area along these rivers to the south of the Ganga was known as the Magadha, now lying in the state of Bihar. Its rulers were very powerful and set up a large kingdom. Kingdoms were set up in other parts of the country as well. Throughout, people traveled from one part of the subcontinent to another. The hills and high mountains, including the Himalayas, deserts, rivers, and seas, made journeys dangerous at times, but never impossible. So, men and women moved in search of livelihood, as also to escape from natural disasters like floods or droughts. Sometimes men marched in armies, conquering other lands. Besides, merchants traveled with caravans or ships, carrying valuable goods from place to place. And religious teachers walked from village to village, town to town, stopping to offer instruction and advice on the way. Finally, some people perhaps traveled driven by a spirit of adventure, wanting to discover new and exciting places. All these led to the sharing of ideas between people. By the way, why do people travel nowadays? Look at map 1 once more. Hills, mountains, and seas form the natural frontiers of the subcontinent. While it was difficult to cross these frontiers, those who wanted could and did scale mountains and cross the seas. People from across the frontiers also came into the subcontinent and settled here. These movements of people enriched our cultural traditions. People have shared new ways of carving stone, composing music, and even cooking food over several hundreds of years. Names of the land. Two of the words we often use for our country are India and Bharat. The word India comes from the Indus, called Sindhu in Sanskrit. The Iranians and the Greeks, who came through the northwest about 2500 years ago and were familiar with the Indus, called it the Hindos or the Indos. and the land to the east of the river was called India. The name Bharata was used for a group of people who lived in the northwest and who are mentioned in the Rig Veda, the earliest composition in Sanskrit, which is dated to about 3500 years ago. Later, it was used for the country. Finding out about the past. There are several ways of finding out about the past. One is to search for and read books that were written long ago. These are called manuscripts because they were written by hand. This comes from the Latin word manu, which means hand. These were usually written on a palm leaf or on the specially prepared bark of a tree known as the birch, which grows in the Himalayas. Over the years, many manuscripts were eaten away by insects. Some were destroyed, but many have survived, often preserved in temples and monasteries. These books dealt with all the kinds of subjects: religious beliefs and practices, the lives of kings, medicine, and science. Besides, there were epics, poems, and plays. Many of these were written in Sanskrit. Others were in Prakrit, which was the languages commonly used by ordinary people, and Tamil. We can also study inscriptions. These are the writings on the relatively hard surfaces, such as stone or metal. Sometimes kings got their orders inscribed so that the other people could see, read, and obey them. There are other kinds of inscriptions as well, where men and women, including kings and queens, recorded what they did. For example, kings often kept records of victories in battle. There were many other things that were made and used in the past. Those who study these objects are called archaeologists. They study the remains of buildings made of stone and brick, paintings, and sculpture. They often explore and excavate, which means dig under the surface of the earth, to find tools, weapons, posts, pans, ornaments, and coins. Some of these objects may be made of stone, others of bone, baked clay, or metal. Objects that are made of hard, imperishable substances usually survive for a long time. Archaeologists also look for bones of animals, birds, and fish to find out what people ate in the past. Plant remains survive far more rarely. If seeds of grain or pieces of wood have been burnt, they survive in a charred form. Historians, that is, scholars who study the past, often use the word source to refer to the information found from manuscripts, inscriptions, and archaeology. Once sources are found, learning about the past becomes an adventure as we reconstruct it bit by bit. So, historians and archaeologists are like detectives who use all these sources like clues to find out about our past. One past or many? Did you notice the title of this book, Our Pasts? We have used the word pasts in plural to draw attention to the fact that past was different for different groups of people. For example, the lives of herders or farmers were different from those of kings and queens. The lives of merchants were different from those of craft persons, and so on. Also, as is true even today, people followed different practices and customs in different parts of the country. For example, today most people living in the Andaman Islands get their own food by fishing, hunting, and collecting forest produce. By contrast, most people living in cities depend on others for supply of food. Differences such as these existed in the past as well. Besides, there is another kind of difference. We know a great deal about kings and the battles they fought because they kept records of their victories. Generally, ordinary people such as hunters, fishing folks, gatherers, farmers, or herders did not keep records of what they did. While archaeology helps us to find out about their lives, there is much that still remains unknown. What do dates mean? If somebody asks you the date, you will probably mention the day, month, and year, 2000 and something. These years are counted from the date generally assigned to the birth of Jesus Christ, the founder of Christianity. So, 2000 means 2000 years after the birth of Christ. All dates before the birth of Christ are counted backwards and usually have the letters BC, that is before Christ, added on. Letters with dates. BC, we have seen, stands for before Christ. You will sometimes find AD before dates. This stands for two Latin words, Anno Domini, meaning in the year of the Lord, that is Christ. So 2012 can be written as AD 2012. Sometimes CE is also written instead of AD and BCE instead of BC. The letters CE stands for Common Era and BCE for Before Common Era. We use these terms because the Christian era is now used in most countries of the world. In India, we began using this form of dating from about 200 years ago. Elsewhere, we have seen that inscriptions are inscribed on hard surfaces. Many of these were inscribed several hundreds of years ago. All inscriptions contain both scripts and languages. Languages which were used as well as scripts have changed over time. So, how do scholars understand what was inscribed? This can be done through a process known as decipherment. One of the most famous stories of decipherment came from Egypt, a country in North Africa, where there were kings and queens about 5000 years ago. Rosetta is a town on the north coast of Egypt, and here an inscribed stone was found which contained inscriptions in three different languages and scripts: Greek and two forms of Egyptian. Scholars who could read Greek figured out that the names of kings and queens were enclosed in a little frame called a cartouche. They then placed the Greek and the Egyptian signs side by side and identified the sounds for which the Egyptian letters stood. As you can see, a lion stood for L and a bird for A. Once they knew what the letters stood for, they could read other inscriptions as well. Thank you so much for studying with me today. I hope this study session was stress free and you enjoyed it. If you did, please press the like button and press the circle to subscribe so that we can make more videos such as these. Thank you. I hope you have a great day.